More from War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. Book 1, Chapter 8. The friends were silent. Neither cared to begin talking. Pierre continually glanced at Prince Andrew. Prince Andrew rubbed his forehead with his small hand. "Let us go and have supper," he said with a sigh, going to the door. They entered the elegant, newly decorated and luxurious dining room. Everything from the table napkins to the silver, china, and glass bore the imprint of newness found in the households of the newly married. Halfway through supper Prince Andrew leant his elbows on the table, and with a look of nervous agitation, such as Pierre had never before seen on his face, began to talk, as one who has long had something on his mind and suddenly determines to speak out. "Never, never marry, my dear fellow. That's my advice. Never marry till you can to yourself. Never marry till you can say to yourself that you have done all you are capable of, and until you have ceased to love the woman of your choice and have seen her plainly as she is, or else you will make a cruel and irrevocable mistake. Marry when you are old and good for nothing, or all that is good and noble in you will be lost. It will all be wasted on trifles. Yes, yes, yes. Don't look at me with such surprise. If you marry expecting anything from yourself in the future, you will feel at every step that for you all is ended, all is closed, except the drawing room, where you will be ranged side by side with a court lackey and an idiot. But what's the good?" And he waved his arm. Pierre took off his spectacles, which made his face seem different, and the good-natured expression still more apparent, and gazed at his friend in amazement. "My wife," continued Prince Andrew, "is an excellent woman, one of those rare women with whom a man's honor is safe. But, oh God, what would I not give now to be unmarried? You are the first and only one to whom I mention this because I like you." As he said this, Prince Andrew was less than ever like the Bolkonsky who had lolled in Anne Pavlovna's easy-chairs, and with half-closed eyes had uttered French phrases between his teeth. Every muscle of his thin face was now quivering with nervous excitement. His eyes, in which the fire of life had seemed extinguished, now flashed with brilliant light. It was evident that the more lifeless he seemed at ordinary times, the more impassioned he became in these moments of most morbid irritation. "You don't understand why I say this," he continued, "but it is the whole story of life. You talk to Bonaparte and his career," said he, though Pierre had not mentioned Bonaparte. But Bonaparte, when he worked, went step by step towards his goal. He was free. He had nothing but his aim to consider, and he reached it. But tie yourself up with a woman, and like a chained convict, you lose all freedom. And all you have to hope and strength, and all you have of hope and strength merely weighs you down and torments you with regret. Drawing rooms, gossip, Balls, vanity, and triviality, these are the enchanted circle I cannot escape from. I am now going to the war, the greatest war there ever was, and I know nothing, and am fit for nothing. I am very amiable, and have a caustic wit, continued Prince Andrew, and at Anna Pavlovna's they listen to me, and that stupid set without whom my wife cannot exist, and those women, if you only knew what those society women are, and women in general. My father is right. Selfish, vain, stupid, trivial in everything. And what women are when you see them in their true colors. When you meet them in society, it seems as if there were something in them. But there's nothing, nothing, nothing. No, don't marry, my dear fellow. Don't marry, concluded Prince Andrew. It seems funny to me, said Pierre, that you should consider yourself incapable and your life a spoilt life. You have everything before you, everything. And you... He did not finish his sentence, but his tone showed how highly he thought of his friend and how much he expected of him in the future. How can he talk like that, thought Pierre. He considered his friend a model of perfection because Prince Andrew possessed in the highest degree just the very qualities Pierre lacked, and which might be best described as strength of will. Pierre was always astonished at Prince Andrew's calm manner of treating everybody, his extraordinary memory, his extensive reading. He had read everything, knew everything, and had an opinion about everything. But above all, at his capacity for work and study. And if Pierre was often struck by Andrew's lack of capacity for philosophical meditation, to which he himself was particularly addicted, he regarded even this not as a defect, but as a sign of strength. Even in the best, most friendly, and simplest relations of life, praise and condemnation are essential, just as grease is necessary to wheels that they may run smoothly. My part is played out, said Prince Andrew. What's the use of talking about me? Let us talk about you, he added after a silence, smiling at his reassuring thoughts. That smile was immediately reflected on Pierre's face. But what is there to say about me? Said Pierre, his face relaxing into a careless, merry smile. What am I? An illegitimate son. He suddenly blushed crimson, and it was plain that he had made a great effort to say this, without a name and without means, and it really, but did not say what it really was. For the present I am free and am all right, only I haven't the least idea what I am to do. I wanted to consult you seriously. Prince Andrew looked kindly at him, yet his glance, friendly and affectionate as it was, expressed a sense of his own superiority. I am fond of you, especially as you are the one live man among our whole set. Yes, you're all right. Choose what you will. It's all the same. You'll be all right anywhere. But look here. Give up visiting those Karegins and leading that sort of life. It suits you so badly. All this debauchery, dissipation, and the rest of it. What would you have, my dear fellow? Answered Pierre, shrugging his shoulders. Women, my dear fellow, women. I don't understand it, replied Prince Andrew. Women who are comme il faut. That's a different matter. But the Kuragans set of women, women and wine. I don't understand. Pierre was staying at Prince Vasily Karagin's and sharing the dissipated life of his son Anatole, the son whom they were planning to reform by marrying him to Prince Andrew's sister. Do you know, said Pierre, as if suddenly struck by a happy thought, seriously, I have long been thinking of it. Leading such a life, I can't decide or think properly about anything. One's head aches, and one spends all one's money. He asked me for tonight, but I won't go. You give me your word of honor not to go. You give me your word of honor not to go? On my honor. Chapter 9. It was past 1 o'clock when Pierre left his friend. It was a cloudless northern summer sky. Pierre took an open cab and intended to drive straight home. But the nearer he drew to the house, the more he felt the impossibility of going to sleep on such a night. It was light enough to see a long way in the deserted street, and it seemed more like morning or evening than night. On the way, Pierre remembered that Anatole Kuragin was expecting the usual set of cards that evening, after which there was generally a drinking bout, finishing with visits of a kind Pierre was very fond of. I should like to go to Kuragin's, thought he, but he immediately recalled his promise to Prince Andrew not to go there. Then, as happens to people of weak character, he desired so passionately once more to enjoy that dissipation he was so accustomed to, that he decided to go. The thought immediately occurred to him that his promise to Prince Andrew was of no account, because before he gave it he had already promised Prince Anatole to come to his gathering. Besides, thought he, all such words of honor are conventional things with no definite meaning, especially if one considers that by tomorrow one may be dead, or something so extraordinary may happen to one that honor and dishonor will be all the same. Pierre often indulged in reflections of this sort, nullifying all his decisions and intentions. He went to Kuragin's. Reaching the large house near the Horse Guards barracks, in which Anatole lived, Pierre entered the lighted porch, ascended the stairs, and went in at the open door. There was no one in the anteroom. Empty bottles, cloaks, and overshoes were lying about. There was a smell of alcohol and sounds of voices and shouting in the distance. Cards and supper were over, but the visitors had not yet dispersed. Pierre threw off his cloak and entered the first room, in which were the remains of supper. A footman, thinking no one saw him, was drinking on the sly what was left in the glasses. From the third room came sounds of laughter, the shouting of familiar voices, the growling of a bear, and general commotion. Some 8 or 9 young men were crowding anxiously round an open window. 3 others were romping with a young bear, one pulling him by the chain and trying to set him at the others. "I bet 100 on Stevens," shouted one. "Mind no holding on," cried another. "I bet on Dolokhov," cried a third. "Kerrigan, you part our hands." "There, leave Bruin alone. Here's a bet on. At 1 draught, or he loses," shouted a fourth. "Jacob, bring a bottle," shouted the host, a tall, handsome fellow who stood in the midst of the group without a coat, and with his fine linen shirt unfastened in front. "Wait a bit, you fellows. Here is Petya. Good man," cried he, addressing Pierre. Another voice, from a man of medium height, with clear blue eyes, particularly striking among all these drunken voices by its sober ring, cried from the window, "Come here, part the bets." This was Dolokhov, an officer of the Semenau regiment, a notorious gambler and duelist who was living with Anatole. Pierre smiled, looking about him merrily. "I don't understand. What's it all about?" "Wait a bit. He is not drunk yet. A bottle here," said Anatole, and taking a glass from the table, he went up to Pierre. "First of all, you must drink." Pierre drank, one glass after another, looking from under his brows at the tipsy guests who were again crowding round the window and listening to the chatter. Anatole kept on refilling Pierre's glass, while explaining that Dolokhov was betting with Stevens, an English naval officer, and he would drink a bottle of rum sitting on the outer edge of the third-floor window with his legs hanging out. "Go on, you must drink it all," said Anatole, giving Pierre the last glass, "or I won't let you go." "No, I won't," said Pierre, pushing Anatole aside, and he went up to the window. Dolokhov was holding the Englishman's hand and clearly and distinctly repeating the terms of the bet, addressing him particularly to Anatole and Pierre. Dolokhov was of medium height, with curly hair and light blue eyes. He was about 25. Like all infantry officers, he wore no moustache, so that his mouth, the most striking feature of his face, was clearly seen. The lines of that mouth were remarkably finely carved. The middle of the upper lip formed a sharp wedge. The middle of the upper lip formed a sharp wedge and closed firmly on the firm lower one. The something like 2 distinct smiles played continually round the 2 corners of the mouth. This, together with the resolute, insolent intelligence of his eyes, produced an effect which made it impossible not to notice his face. Dolokhov was a man of small means and no connections. Yet, though Anatole spent tens of thousands of rubles, Dolokhov lived with him, and had placed himself on such a footing that all who knew him, including Anatole himself, respected him more than they did Anatole. Dolokhov could play all games and nearly always won. However much he drank, he never lost his clear-headedness. Both Kerrigan and Dolokhov were at the time notorious among the rakes and scapegraces of Petersburg. The bottle of rum was brought. The window frame, which prevented anyone from sitting on the outer sill, was being forced out by two footmen, who were evidently flurried and intimidated by the directions and shouts of the gentlemen around. Anatole, with his swaggering air, strode up to the window. He wanted to smash something. Pushing away the footmen, he tugged at the frame, and could not move it. He smashed a pane. "You have a try. You have a try, Hercules," said he, turning to Pierre. Pierre seized the crossbeam, tugged, and wrenched the oak frame out with a crash. "Take it right out, or they'll think I'm holding on," said Dólokhov. "Is the Englishman bragging? Eh?" "Is it all right?" said Anatole. "First rate," said Pierre, looking at Dólokhov, who with a bottle of rum in his hand was approaching the window, from which the light of the sky, the dawn merging with the afterglow of sunset, was visible. Dólokhov, the bottle of rum still in his hand, jumped on the window-sill. "Listen!" cried he, standing there and addressing those in the room. All were silent. "I bet 50 imperials," he spoke, French, that the Englishman might understand him, but he did not speak it very well. "I bet 50 imperials. Or do you wish to make it 100? Added he, addressing the Englishman. "No, 50, replied the latter. "All right, 50 imperials. That I will drink a whole bottle of rum without taking it from my mouth, sitting outside the window on this spot." He stooped and pointed to the sloping ledge outside the window, and without holding on to anything. "Is that right?" "Quite right," said the Englishman. Anatole turned to the Englishman, and taking him by one of the buttons of his coat and looking down at him, the Englishman was short, began repeating the terms of the wager to him in English. "Wait!" cried Dólokhov, hammering with the bottle on the window-sill to attract attention. "Wait a bit, Kirigan. Listen, if anyone else does the same, I will pay him 100 imperials. Do you understand?" The Englishman nodded, but gave no indication whether he intended to accept this challenge or not. Anatole did not release him, and though he kept nodding to show that he understood, Anatole went on translating Dólokhov's words into English. A thin young lad, an hussar of the Life Guards, who had been losing that evening, climbed on the window-sill, leaned over, and looked down. Oh, he muttered, looking down from the window at the stones of the pavement. "Shut up!" cried Dólokhov, pushing him away from the window. The lad jumped awkwardly back into the room, tripping over his spurs. Placing the bottle on the window-sill, where he could reach it easily, Dólokhov climbed carefully and slowly through the window and lowered his legs. Pressing against both sides of the window, he adjusted himself on his seat, lowered his hands, moved a little to the right and then to the left, and took up the bottle. Anatole brought 2 candles and placed them on the window sill, though it was already quite light. Dólokhov's back in his white shirt and his curly head were lit up from both sides. Everyone crowded to the window, the Englishmen in front. Pierre stood smiling, but silent. One man, older than the others present, suddenly pushed forward with a scared and angry look, and wanted to seize hold of Dólokhov's shirt. "I say, this is folly. He'll be killed," said this more sensible man. Anatole stopped him. "Don't touch him. You'll startle him, and then he'll be killed." "Eh? What then? Eh?" Dólokhov turned round, and again holding on with both hands, arranged himself on his seat. "If anyone comes meddling again," said he, emitting the words separately through his thin compressed lips, "I will throw him down there. Now then." Saying this, he again turned round, dropped his hands, took the bottle, and lifted it to his lips, threw back his head, and raised his free hand to balance himself. One of the footmen, who had stooped to pick up some broken glass, remained in that position, without taking his eyes from the window, and from Dólokhov's back. Anatole stood erect, with staring eyes. The Englishman looked on sideways, pursuing up his lips. The man who had wished to stop the affair ran to a corner of the room, and threw himself on a sofa with his face to the wall. Pierre hid his face, from which a faint smile forgot to fade, though his features now expressed horror and fear. All were still. Pierre took his hand from his eyes. Dólokhov still sat in the same position, only his head was thrown further back, till his curly hair touched his short. Dólokhov still sat in the same position, only his head was thrown further back, till his curly hair touched his shirt collar, and the hand holding the bottle was lifted higher, and trembled with the effort. The bottle was emptying perceptibly, and rising still higher, and his head tilting yet further back. "Why is it so long?" thought Pierre. It seemed to him that more than half an hour had elapsed. Suddenly Dólokhov made a backward movement with his spine, and his arm trembled nervously. This was sufficient to cause his whole body to slip as he sat on the sloping ledge. As he began slipping down, his head and arm wavered still more with the strain. One hand moved as if to clutch the window sill, but refrained from touching it. Pierre again covered his eyes, and thought he would never open them again. Suddenly he was aware of a stir all round. He looked up. Dólokhov was standing on the window-sill with a pale but radiant face. "It's empty." He threw the bottle to the Englishman, who caught it neatly. Dólokhov jumped down. He smelt strongly of rum. "Well done. Fine fellow. There's a bet for you. Devil take you. Came from different sides." The Englishman took out his purse and began counting out the money. Dólokhov stood frowning and did not speak. Pierre jumped upon the window-sill. "Gentlemen, who wishes to bet with me? I'll do the same thing," he suddenly cried. "Even without a bet, there. Tell them to bring me a bottle. I'll do it. Bring a bottle." "Let him do it! Let him do it!" said Dólokhov, smiling. "What next? Have you gone mad? No one would let you. Why, you go giddy even on a staircase," exclaimed several voices. "I'll drink it. Let's have a bottle of rum," shouted Pierre, hanging. "Let's have a bottle of rum," shouted Pierre, banging the table with a determined and drunken gesture, and preparing to climb out of the window. They seized him by his arms, but he was so strong that everyone who touched him was sent flying. "No, you'll never manage him that way," said Anatole. "Wait a bit, and I'll get round him. Listen, I'll take your bet tomorrow, but now we are all going to—" "Come on, then," cried Pierre, "come on, and we'll take Bruin with us." And he caught the bear, took it in his arms, lifted it from the ground, and began dancing round the room with it. Chapter 10. Prince Vasíli kept the promise he had given to Princess Drubetskaya, who had spoken to him on behalf of her only son Boris on the evening of Anna Pavlovna's soirée. The matter was mentioned to the Emperor, an exception made, and Boris transferred into the regiment of Semënov Guards, with the rank of cornet. He received, however, no appointment to Kutuzov's staff, despite all Anna Mikhailovna's endeavors and entreaties. Soon after Anna Pavlovna's reception, Anna Mikhailovna returned to Moscow and went straight to her rich relations, the Rostovs, with whom she stayed when in the town, and where her darling Bori, who had only just entered a regiment of the line and was being at once transferred to the Guards as a cornet, had been educated from childhood and lived for years at a time. The Guards had already left Petersburg on the 10th of August, and her son, who had remained in Moscow for his equipment, was to join them on the march to Radzivilov. It was St. Natalia's Day, and the name day of two of the Rostovs, the mother and the youngest daughter, both named Natalie. Ever since the morning carriages with 6 horses had been coming and going continually, bringing visitors to the Countess Rostova's big house on the Povarskaya, so well known to all Moscow. The Countess himself, the Countess herself and her handsome eldest daughter were in the drawing-room with the visitors who came to congratulate, and who constantly succeeded one another in relays. The Countess was a woman of about 45, with a thin oriental type of face, evidently worn out with childbearing. She had had 12. A languor of motion and speech resulting from weakness gave her a distinguished air which inspired respect. Princess Anna Mikhailovna Drubetskaya, who, as a member of the household, was also seated in the drawing-room, helped to receive and entertain the visitors. The young people were in one of the inner rooms, not considering it necessary to take part in receiving the visitors. The Count met the guest and saw them off, inviting them all to dinner. "I am very, very grateful to you, mon cher and mon chéri," he called everyone without exception and without the slightest variation in his tone, "my dear," whether they were above or below him in rank. "I thank you for myself and for our two dear ones, whose name-day we are keeping. But mind you come to dinner, or I shall be offended, ma chérie. On behalf of the whole family, I beg you to come, mon cher." These words he repeated to everyone without exception or variation, and with the same expression on his full, cheerful, clean-shaven face, the same firm pressure of the hand, and the same quick, repeated bows. As soon as he had seen a visitor off, he returned to one of those who were still in the drawing-room, drew a chair towards him or her, and jauntily spreading out his legs, and putting his hands on his knees, with the air of a man who enjoys life and knows how to live, he swayed to and fro with dignity, offered surmises about the weather, or touched on questions of health, sometimes in Russian, and sometimes in very bad but self-confident French. Then again, like a man weary but unflinching in the fulfillment of duty, he rose to see some visitors off, and stroking his scanty grey hairs over his bald patch, also asked them to dinner. Sometimes, on his way back from the ante-room, he would pass through the conservatory and pantry into the large marble dining-hall, where tables were being set out for 80 people, and looking at the footmen who were bringing in silver and china, moving tables, and unfolding damask table linen, he would call Dmitri Vasilievich a man of good family and the manner of all his affairs, and while looking with pleasure at the enormous table would say, "Well, Dmitri, you'll see that things are all as they should be. That's right. The great thing is the serving. That's it." And with a complacent sigh, he would return to the drawing-room. Marya Lvovna Karagina and her daughter announced the Countess's gigantic footman in his bass voice, entering the drawing-room. The Countess reflected a moment and took a pinch from a gold snuff-box with her husband's portrait on it. "I'm quite worn out by these callers. However, I'll see her and no more. She is so affected. Ask her in," she said to the footman in a sad voice, as if saying, "Very well, finish me off." A tall, stout, proud-looking woman with a round-faced, smiling daughter entered the drawing-room, their dresses rustling. Dear Countess, what an age! She has been laid up, poor child. At the Razumovskys' ball, the Countess Apras... Apra... She had... Dear Countess, what an age! She has been laid up, poor child. At the Razumovskys' ball, and Countess Apraxina, I was so delighted. Came the sounds of animated feminine voices, interrupting one another, and mingling with the rustling of dresses and scraping of chairs. Then one of those conversations began which last out until the first pause. The guests rise with a rustle of dresses and say, I am so delighted. Mamma's health, and Countess Apraxina. And then again, rustling, pass into the anteroom, put on cloaks or mantles, and drive away. The conversation was on the chief topic of the day, the illness of the wealthy and celebrated beau of Catherine's day, Count Bezuquet, and about his illegitimate son Pierre, the one who had behaved so improperly at Anna Pavlovna's reception. I am so sorry for the poor Count, said the visitor. He is in such a bad health, and now this vexation about his son is enough to kill him. What is that? Asked the Countess, as if she did not know what the visitor alluded to, though she had already heard about the cause of Count Bezukhov's distress some 15 times. That's what comes of modern education, exclaimed the visitor. It seems that while he was abroad, this young man was allowed to do as he liked, and now in Petersburg, I heard he has been doing such terrible things that he has been expelled by the police. You don't say so, replied the Countess. He chose his friends badly, interposed Anna Mikhailovna. Prince Vasili's son, he and a certain Dolokhov have, it is said, been up to heaven only knows what, and they have had to suffer for it. Dolokhov has been degraded to the ranks, and Bezukhov's son sent back to Moscow. Anatole Kuragin's father managed somehow to get his son's affair hushed up, but even he was ordered out of Petersburg. But what have they been up to? Asked the Countess. They are regular brigands, especially Dolokhov, replied the visitor. He is a son of Marya Ivanovna Dolokhova, such a worthy woman. But there, just fancy. Those three got hold of a bear somewhere, put it in a carriage, and set off with it to visit some actresses. The police tried to interfere, and what did the young men do? They tied a policeman and the bear back to back and put the bear into the Mokhia Canal. And there was the bear swimming about with the policeman on his back. What a nice figure the policeman must have cut, my dear, shouted the Count, dying with laughter. Oh, how dreadful! How can you laugh at it, Count? Yet the ladies themselves could not help laughing. It was all they could do to rescue the poor man, continued the visitor, and to think it is Cyril Vladimirovich Bezukhov's son who amuses himself in this sensible manner. And he was said to be so well educated and clever. This is all his foreign education has done for him. I hope that here in Moscow, no one will receive him in spite of his money. They wanted to introduce him to me, but I quite declined. I have my daughters to consider." "Why do you say this young man is so rich?" asked the Countess, turning away from the girls who at once assumed an air of inattention. "His children are all illegitimate. I think Pierre also is illegitimate." The visitor made a gesture with her hand. "I should think he has a score of them." Princess Anna Mikhailovna intervened in the conversation, evidently wishing to show her connections and knowledge of what went on in society. "The fact of the matter is," said she significantly, and also in a half-whisper, "everyone knows Count Cyril's reputation. He has lost count of his children, but this Pierre was his favorite." "How handsome the old man still was only a year ago," remarked the Countess. "I have never seen a handsomer man." "He is very much altered now," said Anna Mikhailovna. "Well, as I was saying, Prince Vasily is the next heir through his wife, but the Count is very fond of Pierre." "Looked after his education, and wrote to the Emperor about him, so that in case of his death, and he is so ill that he may die at any moment, and Dr. Lorraine has come from Petersburg, no one knows who will inherit his immense fortune, Pierre or a Prince Vasily. 40,000 serfs and millions of rubles. I know it all very well, for Prince Vasily told me himself. Besides, Cyril Vladimirovitch is my mother's second cousin. He's also my Bory's grandfather," she added, as if she attached no importance at all to the fact. "Prince Vasily arrived in Moscow yesterday. I hear he has come on some inspection business," remarked the visitor. "Yes, but between ourselves," said the princess, "that is a pretext. The fact is, he has come to see Count Cyril Vladimirovitch, hearing how ill he is." "But do you know, my dear, that was a capital joke," said the Count, and seeing that the elder visitor was not listening, he turned to the young ladies. "I can just imagine what a funny figure that policeman cut." And as he waved his arms to impersonate the policeman, his portly form again shook with a deep ringing laugh, the laugh of one who always eats well, and, in particular, drinks well. "So, do come and dine with us," he said.